Hi, and thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to fellow book lovers in Norfolk County, and I hope to meet many of you in person and virtually someday. And also appreciate this chance to share something that has given me a lot of pleasure over the years. In this regard, I have but one goal in my presentation today, and that's to encourage you to read and reflect upon all the books that have, or as many as you can, of the books of the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor. The medal is marking its 75th anniversary this year, and I think personally it's an occasion worthy of national celebration. But the best way to mark this kind of thing on a personal level, of course, is to read, to think, and hopefully to smile and to laugh a bit. For those of you who don't know, the Leacock Medal is an annual literary award, one of the oldest in Canada, and it's certainly the oldest for humor. Specifically, it's for the best book of humor written in English in the previous year, and by a Canadian. It was, of course, established to honor Stephen Leacock, once regarded the most popular writer of any kind in the English-speaking world. He died in 1944 and has been celebrated in many ways. His summer home in Orillia is now a museum and a National Historic Site. It's quite a beautiful setting. You might want to go to Orillia this year to help us mark the 75th anniversary. But the Leacock Medal is probably the most high-profile commemoration of Leacock's memory. It was given out for the first time 75 years ago in 1947, and medal winners include many of Canada's best-known writers: Mordecai Richler, Robertson Davies, Pierre Burton, W.O. Mitchell, Farley Mowat, and more recently Terry Fallis, Will Ferguson. And it means that reading these books shouldn't be too much of a burden. And they're easy to access too. Many of the books are in the Norfolk County Library collection. And in the case of the newer, more recent winners of the Leacock Medal, you can find them in most bookstores. The historical list is not as diverse a list as you might like. Women won a number of the early medals in the 1940s and 50s, and they've been better represented along with other people of our society in more recent short lists and in the winners list as well. My credentials for speaking about this subject come from research that I did on the Leacock Medal about a decade ago and was published in a book. It's been lightly updated over the years and augmented with online reviews and podcast interviews, and it's been republished. Reprinted, I should say, for this anniversary year. The book is largely an effort to do what I'm trying to do here, and that's encourage people to read the Leacock Medal books. Now, you can read these books just for fun. That's an appropriate approach to reading books, but I also invite you to study them. I personally, as a writer who aspires to improve his skills, I wanted to study techniques and different writing styles, and of course maybe laugh a bit. I'd already written a number of books at the time. They were mainly science, technology, and history, so I thought humor writing might give me a more robust profile or portfolio of tools to use as a writer. So I compiled the book as a collection of writing lessons based on each medal winner, and I wrote it from the perspective of a student, and they include exercises. Now, some people suggest what I'm saying, to study humor is not just a waste of time, it's kind of destructive, and they get headaches trying to describe what is funny. Arthur Black, CBC host who won the medal, I think 3 times, said that trying to define what is funny is like trying to braid smoke, and it's a personal thing. There are established basic techniques in comedy and humor that are learnable and can be adapted to various themes and circumstances. So if you're a writer, you might want to study these books from that perspective, like the fish out of water story that populates so many rom-com movies. But then there's also tricks like this one, the humor triad, where you say something serious, another something serious to establish an expectation, and then disrupt it with something off the wall, like this celebrated example from the old Dick Van Dyke Show. My book, in my book, I commend the process of reading and studying humor and this collection, not just only for the purpose of learning techniques and writing styles, but also I found that the process of studying humor in this way is a form of introspection. You can learn a lot of stuff about yourself when you're always asking, well, why is this funny, and why does this fall flat, and why you have a certain take on something that's funny. And in a way, it's a sort of a window on your soul. As Robert Thomas Allen, a writer who's quoted here, says he gave it a lot of thought by studying children. He says humor in the joke doesn't come from the joke itself, but from a lot of mental images, ideas, feelings, and associations that a joke suggests. Now, for me, thinking about these things as I wrote about the Leacock Medal books, I learned that old memories haunt me more than I realized, and I now look at sad thoughts as seeds for funny ones. But I'd stress that an added advantage of studying this particular assembly of humor, as opposed to maybe American humor or British humor, is the possibility of learning more about Canadian literature, CanLit, and Canada in the process. It's sort of a way to trace the evolution of Canadian society, and maybe being a portal on the study of how Canada has or has not evolved over the years. In fact, the very first book to win the Leacock Medal in 1947 inspired the first university programs in Canadian studies and Indigenous studies by inspiring the author. The author was Harry Simons. His son was Tom Simons, who founded Trent University, and many programs and many organizations dedicated to the study of Canada. But it's fair to say that the books, some of them, the older ones, are dated, and some people think that the model for the Leacock Medal winners of small towns, Anglo-Protestant communities, as painted by Stephen Leacock, no longer defines Canada. But I think they still have at their core a lot of merit. I found it particularly useful to look at these issues from the perspective of Stephen Leacock's definition of humor. The kindly, it's quite famous in the Leacock circles, the kindly contemplation of the incongruities of life and the artistic expression thereof. There's three elements to this definition: the incongruities, which seem to be the core of most humor, and artistic ability. But one of the elements, the kindly word, it causes some people anxiety. Robertson Davies thought it was nonsense, but that's based on the interpretation of the notion that humor always has to be kind. But actually, a lot of scholars who studied Leacock, like Gerald Lynch, the university professor, find that Leacock's use of the word kindly was actually, it's more of a 19th century connotation, where it was more aligned with the root of the word, like kin and kinship. And in this regard, the notion that a book should speak to a kin or a particular community is something I think that echoes down through the books to today. There's, in the early days, there was the small town Canadian communities in the prairies and down east. But now you can probably find communities in all kinds of different locations and sectors of society, and of course enclaves in big cities. If you were to read one book from this collection that rolls this humorous take of community, Canadianity, and incongruity all into a ball, and you only had time to read one Leacock Medal book from the past this year, I'd commend Sarah Binks. It's the 1948 winner. I'm always surprised a bit when people haven't heard of the book, because the community I circulate in and humor writing circles consider the book iconic. It's a pretend biography of an imaginary poetess, Sarah Binks, who's labeled Saskatchewan's greatest poet, and it's encased, all this bad poetry is encased in a gushing, over-the-top biography, and it's this juxtaposition of the bad poetry and the glowing biography that makes you smile. And of course, the author was looking at his own community and his own circles in Western Canada with affection, but from a distance. And I think it's that ability to stand back from your own little community and still love the people in it, but still see their quirks that can be empowering and can be the basis for a lot of humor writing. Now that's a pretty fuzzy statement, but there were other patterns in the Leacock Medal books that border on a crystallized formula. One of them is the passage of time. You may have heard the expression tragedy plus time equals humor. And many of the books I found had this passage of time feature. Like in the 1950s, early 60s, you started to see funny books about life during the Depression years. And then in the mid-60s, you even saw humorous takes on war. It's pretty glowing in some of the books, and some of the ones featured on this screen. But the 20 to 25 year stretch also seemed to be evident in memoirs and in personal reminiscences about even an abusive childhood experience that could somehow be conveyed with a kind of affection and humor that is only possible after an extended period and distance from it. Another pattern that I'd maybe was evident in the Sarah Binks book, but is in others, is this notion of mixing genres. The book that's featured here, it looks like a children's book, and if you look at half of the book, it's in nursery rhyme kind of format with that ABC, Darium, A is for ape, B is for beaver style, and little poems for the kids. But on the opposite page, there's some prose with biological information and facts about the animal that's featured on the other side in funny prose that is aimed at the parents. So the two formats beside each other kind of create a really unique humorous effect. It's also evident in the Sisters Brothers, the multi-award-winning novel that takes the brutality of the Western genre and cloaks it with kind of a silliness. It's something that is a dark humor, but it works. So those are just three notions I'd throw out to you in this presentation, particularly aimed at writers and people who are more students of literature and particularly interested in humor writing. There's lots of ideas that you can glean from the books, but the three that I would commend to you is this notion of finding your community and looking at it from the outside. Then there's the mixing of genres, and, of course the whole idea of passage of time. Finally, I would like to stress that, and as I'm concluding now with the fact that good humor writing is essentially good writing for a particular effect. If you have the skills of a good writer, you can direct them at inducing emotion and, of course, humor and smiles. And all those rules about using apt metaphors, good grammar, and efficiency come into play. My mentor for my book was Dan Niels. He's an Order of Canada recipient, a celebrated playwright, author, and somebody who was just recently here in Norfolk County at Waterford in a celebration of life in rural Canada. Anyways, maybe his orientation toward stories from rural Ontario sort of induced his bias to efficient plain language talk, but that was his main theme in advising me on my book. He was a strong advocate of E.B. White's omit needless words mantra, as described in this quote and illustrated by these potentially needless words and their deletion, which I believe does not change the essential meaning of the sentence. And Needles, and I'm sharing, I guess, my benefits of his support here on things that you might contemplate if you're a writer or even a professional or amateur exercise. each time he looked at my book, he would come back with a challenge, and each time I'd say, like, what the hell? I can't, this is not going to improve the book. I get the point that you should not have minimum number of adverbs or adjectives, but if you just remove them all arbitrarily, or if you take out the verb to be without any contemplation, you're not going to necessarily produce a better book. But now I realize that the purpose of these exercises was not the amelioration of a specific text, but it was to ingrain a specific muscle or a habit and a biased way of writing. In addition to looking at ways to express yourself with active verbs and meaningful nouns, it really makes you, gives you the impulse to really judge the value of each word. So these three little exercises, if you like, are ones that I would advocate. They're hard, but try them. So anyways, I think that I've covered most of what I wanted to say. The techniques are learnable, as you saw in the previous slide, and there are a lot of opportunities to think about the evolution of Canada in these books, because they are sequential and over the decades. You can learn a lot about what we share as Canadians and how our country has evolved, whether you're a new arrival or your ancestry goes back thousands of years. And I think it's kind of particularly valuable in this era of echo chambers and so much division, to be able to look at what we share in this regard. And of course, as I said, you can find out a bit about yourself when you reflect on why you find things so funny. So I would invite you to do it, to read these books from that perspective, but maybe you might want to visit Old Brewery Bay. That's the view from the Leacock Museum near Aurelia, and it makes for a great place to sit and reflect on your personality and what you find funny. So I commend the Leacock Metal books to you and invite you to read some of them this year, and check these links. The Norfolk County Library has a number of the Leacock medalists, and you can just search Leacock Medal and find it. You can also go to the Leacock Medal site to find out how you might compete for the medal yourself if you've got a book in the works. And they also have a high school student writing contest. And finally, there's my blog where you can find podcasts and other materials about the book. And if you'd like a free copy of my book or want to talk about any of this stuff, feel free to contact me through this email address. And so again, I really like to thank you. And again, I hope to meet you in person someday and maybe talk about these books and other things. Thanks very much.